What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 109 of the DFS Dose podcast, a special video episode of the show. First time we've done one of these all year, and we are here to preview the Thanksgiving slate on Draftkings, a 3-game main slate. We're going to switch up the style of the show. I am, of course, your host, Ben Hauver, joined by Joey Carrion, as you can see on the screen if you are watching this on YouTube. Perhaps you're listening in audio. I mean, you're missing out. You have a chance to see our busted mugs on YouTube. Get over there. What are you doing? But on today's show, we are going to get into some slate specifics, and we're going to switch things up and go game by game. As I'm sure a lot of you know, there is one of these games heavily in question, so we want to make the format as possible for people to digest if we do see a situation where if we do see a situation where the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game does get delayed, at least 70% of this podcast will still matter. But before we get into anything, Joey, can you tell the people how they can support the podcast?
You can help support the DFS Dose by subscribing to us on YouTube. If you're watching this video right now, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. We're at 127 subscribers, so if we can hit that 130 benchmark, that would be terrific. And if you're interested in listening to the podcast on Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, if you're watching the video, you can go over on those apps. We release a podcast every Thursday and every single Monday, every single week for the entire NFL season. We break down each slate and then we recap each slate. So make sure you go over there and subscribe or follow, depending on what podcast site you use. And then lastly, you can follow us on Twitter, which will be on the screen right here, at the DFS Dose. So make sure you go over there and follow us. That's where we tweet out all of the links to our content. So it's just one simple place to digest all of our content on any given day. So make sure you follow us on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, do you want to tell the people about our content schedule for the week? I know we have some things shifting days.
Yeah, so if you're watching this video, it's on Wednesday, or listening to the podcast, this is Wednesday. For Thursday, it's going to be my Millie Maker video / tournament stack video on YouTube, releasing on Thursday. And then for Friday, we will release our NFL Week 12 main slate preview per usual. Every single Friday in the morning it comes out, so that will be ready on Friday. And then Ben's cash pool video will also be releasing on Friday, and then Ben's cash pool article will be releasing on Saturday instead of Friday this week. And then next Monday, so a couple days from now, 6 days from now, we will be recapping the NFL Week 12 slate in total. So probably we'll recap Thanksgiving for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll recap the main slate. So be on the lookout for all of the content that's coming out literally every single day this week.
Every day. The grind doesn't stop. Looking forward to putting all that out. Now let's get into this Thanksgiving slate, starting off with slate specifics. Now, looking at this game from a Vegas perspective, we do have 3 games, obviously. One game at 12:30 Eastern, one at 4:30 Eastern, and one at 8:20 Eastern. Our first game is Houston at Detroit, which has the highest total of the week, currently set at 51, with the Lions as 2.5-point home underdogs. Our second game, the middle 4:30 game, is Washington at Dallas with a 46 total. The Cowboys are home favorites here by 3. And then finally, another home favorite in the Steelers, who are hosting the Ravens. Steelers favored by 4. Interestingly, you'll notice that the totals go down consistently. So we're starting off hot with the Detroit-Houston game, and then we're finishing with the Steelers and Ravens with the lowest total on the slate. Houston does have the highest implied team total on the road with 26.75. Every other team's implied team total is below 25 on this slate. What stands out to you in this slate of games?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Texans and Detroit Lions game stands out as the early game. I think that is going to provide the most fantasy potential, in my opinion, with two, pretty solid offenses, especially if the Lions can get some of their skill position players back, and then two largely bad defenses. So there's going to be a lot of fantasy goodness in that game. Not really too excited about the Washington Dallas game, but I think there are individually some good plays in that game. And then we'll touch on it probably after the Cowboys game, but the Ravens and Steelers game might not even play, but we're going to proceed as if it is. And in that game, I think that's kind of a game where you stack it, and it's because defense doesn't matter. And I think that some of the players in that game are going to be lower owned than others and could provide you some leverage on the field, especially if you want to bank one of these high dollar tournaments that they have for this Thanksgiving slate.
Yeah, in general, I agree with everything you just said, and we'll get into each game specifically in a moment here. In terms of the Thanksgiving slate in general, from like a general overview sense, you'll hear on any podcast or video that you watch breaking this stuff down this week that Thanksgiving is the best slate of the year. And, why do the DFS professionals think that? Well, it's because, there's this general perception that, a lot of the quote unquote public, inexperienced DFS players are going to come and play because, there's 3 games. They can watch all the games. It's Thanksgiving. Everybody's laid back. They want to get some action. And that makes sense to me. And I think that to a certain extent, it's true. But I do want to caution people, I don't think that, more than 10% of the field on Draftkings are going to be stonefish, have no subscription to a premium service or any idea what they're doing. I think that the majority of people will know what they're doing. I mean, I know Draftkings is pumping out the incentives to get new players on there, putting out a bunch of free tickets on, their partners in the DFS industry to get people joined in there and get them, playing this $1 million tournament on Thanksgiving. So there is an edge, especially I think in cash games. And the other final point that I want to make from a general overview sense is that we have 3 games that are all spaced out in solo spots, which means that late swap will be very important this week, just like we saw 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that you said. And then just touching on, the new users coming in, there would definitely be new users on Thanksgiving. Like you mentioned, everybody's going to be at home, stuffing their faces with some Thanksgiving dinner, eating some turkey, hanging out with the fam. So obviously there's going to be new players. They're just going to want to gamble on the games a little bit. But like you mentioned, a lot of these players have access to these premium services like Roto Grinders, which I know is very popular. So it's not like they are clear-cut fish, clear-cut donkeys, but there could still be an edge there, which is why people love this slate. And then definitely late swap is going to be very important. And I think that's where the edge comes in for this slate, because those casual players, because those new players who are playing on Thanksgiving aren't going to be doing that. So it'll definitely give you leverage on the field if you utilize that feature on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, hell, even a large portion of experienced players won't be late swapping. So I definitely think that is quite possibly the biggest edge that you will have on Thanksgiving, is utilizing that and seeing where you are in the standings and making the proper pivots where need be. So without any further ado, let's get into our first game, the 12:30 game. We have Houston at Detroit. My Detroit Lions, stone cold tradition. Got to get the Lions in there, cause a little extra misery for me on Thanksgiving. And this is not looking like a game where I think Lions fans will be happy. I mean, I don't see how, a Lions team that looked completely helpless against PJ Walker is going to be able to hold off Deshaun Watson and the Houston Texans in this game.
Yeah, I think this is a spot to target the Texans, as the Lions defense just can't stop opposing wide receivers, can't stop opposing quarterbacks, and can't stop opposing running backs. So obviously a great spot for Watson, a great spot for Duke Johnson, which we can touch on in a minute, and a great spot for the Texans wide receivers. And I think that is one of the biggest decision points on this slate. Are we going to play Duke Johnson this week at 5,700 in one of the best spots for the entire Week 12, although this man has been trash ever since David Johnson has left with an injury. 10 attempts for 3 catches last week, 6 points. In Week 10 against Cleveland as Stone Chalk, 54 yards, 5.4 points, 14 attempts, no catches. So are we playing Duke Johnson in our tournament teams? I think that is one of the more important decisions for players this weekend. or for players on Thanksgiving?
Well, the first thing I want to say is that I think that Duke Johnson has been trashed long before David Johnson got hurt. I want to say that out there. I think that this is a player who has had unwarranted hype about him for a long time now. That being said, this is a really difficult spot to get away from him, priced at $5,700. Now, his price has risen in 3 consecutive games, despite being entirely unproductive in his 2 starts for the Texans. Now, last week, the interesting thing that I saw looking at his usage is that he went from handling 95% of the snaps that we saw in that disastrous wind game against Cleveland to only seeing 77% of snaps last week. The encouraging thing is that he did see 5 targets. Now, it was weird in that Cleveland game. I mean, I think that we can kind of throw that game away because the conditions just altered it. But Duke didn't have any role in the receiving game, which is kind of what makes him a theoretically valuable asset. It was good to see that he had 5 targets. And going against this Lions team, I don't see any way that the Lions find themselves in a positive game script. I think that Houston, should be leaning on Duke Johnson in this spot, especially towards the end of the game when they're likely going to be up multiple points. Duke Johnson, I think he's a good play, and I think that you can play him this week because the rest of the running back field is pretty barren. It's a wasteland out there.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I think Duke Johnson will be popular this week, although, the consensus around the industry, around the DFS community is that, Duke Johnson isn't the player that he was hyped up to be, and he is pretty trash, and the Texans don't utilize their running backs in a viable fantasy way. So I think it's tough to fade him, and I'll be playing him in a couple lineups, but I don't think I'll be 100% on. But I think a running back that is in a great spot, probably the best spot out of any single running back in Week 12, is DeAndre Swift at home against a Houston defense that literally gets obliterated by opposing running backs. And at 6,500, I think DeAndre Swift is a lock if he plays. So
yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with that. I think Swift is probably the best pure running back play on the slate. He did return to practice on Tuesday, and the injury that held him out last week was just, being stuck in the concussion protocol. So that's not something that should hamper his play in any way whatsoever. Once he's back, he should be 100% good. 6,500, I really don't see how you get away from Swift in this spot. I mean, even if the Lions are in a negative game script like we expect them to be, that's good because Swift is a legit pass-catching threat. Kenny Golladay also missed practice on Tuesday, so he is trending in the wrong direction, which would only increase the potential target share that Swift sees in this spot. Absolutely love DeAndre Swift.
Yeah, I love Swift too. And say if he's out, I think I would be more inclined to play Kerryon Johnson. Kerryon played on 70% of the Lions' snaps last week. I think a little bit more than 70%. Had more touches than Adrian Peterson. So I think he would be the guy to roster over AP at a lower salary. But hopefully we don't have to consider AP or Kerryon Johnson in this spot because God, they are just pure dust.
Yeah, Kerryon, what's his price? He's not even min, right? He's like 46 or something.
He's 43. Kerryon Johnson is 4,300. AP is 4,700.
Oh God, yeah. They had to give him a nice price boost after that 1.8 points that he scored last week. But let's not talk about these dusty Detroit backups. I think that the highlight of this game, in my opinion, is Deshaun Watson. So one thing that I think is really important with these small slates, 3-game slates, stuff like that, is identifying what players at each position have a chance to separate from the group. And I think Deshaun Watson is the highest ceiling quarterback on this slate. Mm-hmm. He has 3 games with 29 DraftKings points or more. No other quarterback has more than 1. 3 of the 6 starters on this slate haven't hit 29 points once all year. So Deshaun Watson, to me, has the highest ceiling, and he has the most likely chance of hitting that ceiling. Like you said, this Lions defense is going to be no threat to him, and he has great stacking options in Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. Brandon Cooks, in my opinion, like Watson, is one of the best plays on the slate. He is the lowest priced player, in my opinion, with a realistic shot to score 25 plus points. If you look at every player in the skill range, Brandon Cooks is priced extremely fairly, 4,300, and he has a monster ceiling. Oh yeah, 53. I'm sorry, misspoke. 5,300, and he only had 5 targets last week, but he had 8 or more targets in 5 straight games prior to that. So Brandon Cooks, I think, is one of the clear-cut best values on the slate, and his upside is really high relative to players in his price range.
Yeah, I definitely don't mind Brandon Cooks. I think I would rather pair Will Fuller with Deshaun Watson in tournaments. I think Will Fuller has a higher ceiling than Brandon Cooks, so I'd be more inclined to play Fuller at 6,400 over Cooks at 5,300, but he's still a fine play. It looks like Kenny Golladay isn't going to be back, so we won't be able to play him at 6,000, which would probably be one of the best plays on the board in terms of point per dollar. I think the key to this slate is finding cheap wide receiver value that is going to be low owned in tournaments, especially if you go the DeAndre Swift, Zeke Elliott, Antonio Gibson, etc. route at running back. You're going to need to save salary, especially if you play Deshaun Watson at quarterback. And I think one of my favorite value plays on the board is Kiki Kuti at 3,400 with Randall Cobb ruled out. Kenny Stills is questionable and looks like he's going to be ruled out too. Kuti came into relief as the wide receiver 3, saw 4 targets against New England, scored 1 touchdown. So I think him at 3,400 would be in play as a pay down wide receiver. And then just in general for tournament theory on this 3-game slate, you're going to need to hit on one of these cheap wide receivers if you want to win the big bucks this week, in my opinion. So he's one of the players that I'm going to be playing in my tournament lineups for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I think that one of these 3K guys will be in in every winning lineup for these tournaments. Mm-hmm. And I think that Kuti is one of 3 guys that I think could be that person. I think there's one in each game, and Kuti is the one in this game that I'm most interested in. Like you said, Randall Cobb out, and I think that he fits directly right into that slot role. I mean, he should be, pound for pound playing as many snaps as Randall Cobb did and have that exact same role without much of a downgrade, if a downgrade at all, right? So,
yeah. And then I just want to mention one more person. Mm-hmm. At the tight end position, which we could touch on real quick. I think Jordan Akins at 2,900 is one of my favorite tournament tight end plays on the board, especially when you have TJ Hawkinson, Mark Andrews on this slate, Dalton Schultz, and Logan Thomas. I think Jordan Akins will get lost in the shuffle. And at 2,900, it's just a cheap price tag for a player that can see 5-6 targets in any single game. And I think he has a chance to smash this week against the Lions. So he's one of my favorite tournament plays as well. And he's a salary saver, so works out.
Agreed. I don't think he's necessarily like quote unquote safe, but I mean, if he catches a touchdown and like 2 balls at 2,900, you're absolutely sailing to the money. And I mean, Darren Fells for 2,700 too, in terms of large field, has shown the ability to have good games. The problem with the Texans is they rotate 3 tight ends, so you never really know where it's going to go. But I think Akins is the most athletic, so realistically has the most upside, the most opportunity to like make something of the plays that he does have a chance to get. So. Akins is definitely a standout to me. Hawkinson, you could say he's in play as well at 4,700, especially in game stacks. But, personally, without Golladay there, I don't see myself wasting any lineups with Matthew Stafford. And I'll just be looking maybe for TJ Hawkinson bringbacks or potentially something like a Marvin Jones bringback. Any interest in Jones before we move on at 5,500? Had a pretty big game in week 10, 23.6 DraftKings points, only had 9.1 DraftKings points last week, but also had a 51-yard touchdown called off the board. So, I mean, we could have been looking at, basically 2 20-point games back-to-back with Marvin Jones, and he would have been, probably closer to 6K if that touchdown didn't get called back.
Yeah, I definitely like Marvin Jones this week as a, mid-range wide receiver value. And as the wide receiver 1, if Kenny Galladay's out, I think he has potential to see 8 to 10 targets in this spot, especially if we can project the Lions to be losing in this matchup. So I don't mind Marvin Jones. I think he is a good play, but definitely not going to be locking him into all of my lineups. I think I'll probably have about 50% Marvin Jones.
Yep. All right. Yeah, I like him. He's my favorite piece to bring back with Texan stacks. And like I said, I won't be stacking Stafford on this slate. So
Hmm.
let's move on to our second game, Washington at Dallas. And you touched on this in slate specifics, and I couldn't agree more. I don't think that this is a game that you stack. I think that there are really strong pieces in this game at multiple positions, and I'm interested in playing those guys. But the quarterbacks, Alex Smith and Andy Dalton, they just don't have the upside. I think that there are limitations, on these players as, the type of players they are that just cap the potential to see multiple skill positions hit their ceiling. So I personally won't be playing either of these quarterbacks, but some of the best plays on the slate do come from this game. And one of them is Ezekiel Elliott, who, in my opinion, will be the highest owned player on this slate, potentially by a wide margin.
Yeah, I definitely think Zeke is a phenomenal play at 6,800, too cheap for the workload that he's receiving on a weekly basis. Now, his receptions have declined ever since Dak came out of the starting lineup. This dude was getting six catches, 8 catches in 3 straight games. Now he's relegated to 1 or 2 catches a game. So not much receiving upside with Zeke, but the volume is there at home in a good matchup. I definitely like Zeke a lot. I think Antonio Gibson may be my favorite running back play on the board besides DeAndre Swift this week. At 6,000, we saw Antonio Gibson just a couple weeks ago play Dallas, scored 21.8 points, had 128 yards, and this Dallas defense can just get exposed by opposing running backs. So I think this is a good spot for Antonio Gibson. And you could get crazy and play Zeke and Antonio Gibson in the same lineup, although it negatively correlates. I think having those two in your lineup, not a lot of people will do that on Thanksgiving, and that's just one way to get leverage on the field. So I kind of like roster constructions with those two guys.
Yeah. So let me hit on a couple of things that you said. So first of all, Zeke, while his receiving role has gone down, he did have 10 targets in Andy Dalton's first start. So if there is a possible outcome where Washington is leading in this game, I do think that we could see Zeke be used in that fashion. And to that point, and to the Gibson point, there was an issue today where one of the Cowboys, I think it was their strength and conditioning coach, had a medical emergency, and it stopped the Cowboys practice today, and everybody got sent home on Tuesday. So, missing a practice on a short week is extremely detrimental. It's not like this was a monster team that can just bounce back because their preparation has been so good. Obviously best wishes for the coach. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name, but, just it doesn't set up well, I think, for Dallas. I think it increases the opportunity for Washington to win in this game despite being underdogs by 3 in this spot. So that does, in my opinion, boost Antonio Gibson. Now, this is a near even split in the Washington backfield. Gibson played 53% of snaps last week. McKissick played on 52%. So there's obviously a little bit of overlap in both of them being on the field at the same time. But this was the first time in 5 games that Gibson had been on the field for over 50% of snaps. He is still very much a part-time player right now. So he could get there. He's been efficient. He's been explosive. And I think his ceiling is there. I just wouldn't recommend playing him in cash games if you are in fact playing cash on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. But I think they're starting to realize that Antonio Gibson is the best running back on the team and deserves to be on the field more. And I know they haven't played him on third downs, but it's not like he isn't capable. Like, God forbid, this dude was a wide receiver in college, so he can obviously catch the ball really well. They just want McKissick in that role, which is unfortunate and obviously kind of limits Gibson's upside. But I think with him being a very explosive player, and like you said, he's been very efficient, that will help him get there in terms of ceiling. And then I just want to mention one point. I think there's an edge in fading games with 2 bad offenses. So I think around the industry, people will see like there's 2 bad defenses in this game and that the offenses should magically become good out of nowhere and put up an insane amount of points and make some of these guys the highest owned plays on the slate. I don't think that's the case. I think if we have 2 bad offenses, I think the process is you fade these bad offenses in, good spots kind of. It really isn't a good spot for the Washington offense, I don't think. So I'm not going to be playing many of these guys. I think there are some decent plays. Like I think McLaurin is obviously a great play at 7,000, but other than that, I wouldn't really target Washington wide receivers. Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, and Gallup are still too cheap in my opinion, but I don't think it's a great matchup for them. Washington has been tough against opposing wide receivers, so I don't think I will have much exposure to them. I don't know. Am I wrong to fade those players in tournaments, or am I bugging?
I mean, I think that there's still possibility for certain players to go off in this game, but kind of like I said at the beginning, I just don't want to stack it because I just don't see these offenses having smash spots, kind of like you're saying. So like I'll play, Lamb and Gibson as, correlated one-offs in a lineup, but I think that in general, I want to hold the amount of players that I have in a given lineup from this game to be like 2, maybe 3 max, but probably 2, maybe a Dallas receiver and Terry McLaurin, or, a Washington running back and, one of the Cowboys receivers. But ultimately, I mean, I think that there are good plays. Like I think Cooper's for his ceiling is underpriced at 5.7K, led the Dallas receivers in targets. I think Lamb, who had one of the most impressive catches you'll see all year last week, was second in targets with 6, also added 2 rushing attempts, so 8 total opportunities. And then Gallup is 3,500, and he is one of the 3 players below 4K at wide receiver that I think has a high enough ceiling that he could find himself in tournament winning lineup. So I think all 3 guys are viable. I just wouldn't want more than one of them in a given lineup because I don't think Andy Dalton is going to propel them to a point where 2 of them are needed to win a tournament.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think we're pretty much on the same page in terms of this game. We're not going to be stacking this game. We're not going to be playing Andy Dalton and Alex Smith, except for maybe in one lineup just to have some exposure. But other than that, I think this is a game where, like you said, you play 2 players as a mini stack, a mini correlation, and you target the other games.
So 2 questions to finish this off. The first is, how many, say you're playing 10 tournament teams, how many of them are you playing Zeke in?
If I had to give a rough number, probably 6.
Okay. Because I think that his ownership will probably be 60 to 70%. Like we saw this last year. I'm pretty sure it was Alvin Kamara who was the clear-cut best play, and he was like 80%. Because like the thing about this is, I mean, we have DeAndre Swift, and then we have these Washington guys, but other than that, it's like, the 2 Ravens running backs, maybe if that game plays, and then we have, James Conner in a pretty bad spot. So what, people are going to play Swift? I mean, Duke Johnson. There are definitely viable ways, I guess, to get away from Zeke if he doesn't have a monster game. And he really hasn't had a monster game. So, this is sort of a larger point, but I think that you can get away from Zeke. Depending on what his ownership is projected to be, I think will depend on how much I want to play him. But I personally think that I want to be underweight on Zeke in this spot, find some value at running backs, because to me, I would rather pay up at wide receiver. The Pittsburgh guys, and Terry McLaurin, who's the other thing that I want to talk about here. I mean, let's give Terry McLaurin, a little shout out here. He's priced at 7K flat. He is the highest priced non-quarterback on the slate, and he's been absolutely amazing this year. He's seeing the 6th most targets per game, 9.3 on average. He has the 2nd largest share of team air yards in the entire NFL, accounting for 46.5% of Washington's team targets. Just absolutely amazing. Team air yards. And Dallas is allowing the 2nd most fantasy points per game to wide receiver. I think Terry is high priced at 7K. It's not a value, but he's got to be in your lineups. I mean, I'd be more pressed to play Terry McLaurin for 200 more than Zeke if given the opportunity straight up.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you on everything that you said. Terry McLaurin is probably the best wide receiver play on the board this week, in my opinion. So I'm definitely going to have a lot of exposure to McLaurin, and then 100% I will say I am going to take shots on these cheap Washington wide receivers, Steven Sims, Cam Sims, Dontrell Inman. Have to do more research on them and who's playing the most, but they're all between 31 and 3,300. And like I mentioned in the first game, you're going to need to smash on one of these cheap wide receivers if you want to be unique and if you want to win tournaments. So I'm definitely going to take a shot on a guy like Steven Sims Jr., who has shown, just as recently as last season that he does have, a 20, 25 point ceiling. Hasn't shown it in 2020 so far, but if he can get 5-6 targets, then it's all about, can he capitalize on those 6 targets and maybe score a long touchdown? And that's what this week is. You're just going to have to take shots on some of these thinner guys that are getting opportunity, that are getting targets in hopes to win tournaments. You're not going to win if you don't, in my opinion. So just had to throw that in there with the Washington wide receiver talk.
Yeah. Steven Sims to me is the one of the two Sims that I would prefer between the two Washington backup wide receivers. Mm-hmm. Let's move on to our last game, Baltimore at Pittsburgh. Now, the Ravens saw a flurry of positive COVID tests on Tuesday. Adam Schefter tweeted that if they see any more, there's a high likelihood that this game gets postponed. Now, I mean, Joey, let's be real here. The NFL does not want to lose this game. They don't want to lose 1/3 of their action on Thanksgiving, one of the most watched days of football, and ultimately, that's what matters to the NFL. I think it's pretty obvious to say that.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen no positive tests on Sundays for the entire year. Do you think that is because there are actually no positive tests, or do you think that's because they don't want to cancel games? I'll let the listeners think on that one for a minute. But yeah, I mean, we're just going to proceed as if this game is playing. Obviously, this video will be out before we get any news on positive COVID tests and if the game is going to get postponed or canceled or whatever. But, like I just said, we're gonna act as if it is playing. So just talking about this game real quick, and I just want to bring it back to a point that you brought up with Dallas missing a practice. Baltimore isn't practicing the whole week. And you touched on it when talking about the Dallas coach. If this team isn't practicing all week, going up against, one of the toughest matchups in the NFL in the Pittsburgh defense on the road, it's going to be a tough time for the Baltimore Ravens on Thursday if that game gets played.
It is. And I think it's going to be a tough time for the Ravens defense as well, trying to match up with, one of the past happiest teams in the league in Pittsburgh, who's really been turning it up. I'm pretty sure that they're passing at the 3rd highest rate in neutral situations. To me, this game, I think, has the most opportunity for leverage on the field. I think that most of the ownership on, say, wide receivers and potentially 2 of the highest owned running backs in Swift and Duke will come in the first game. The highest ownership at quarterback will come in the first game with Deshaun Watson. And I think that there will be a lot of ownership in the middle game as well on guys like McLaurin and Zeke. And like we both mentioned, that is a game that I think that we want to be underweight on as a whole. So this game, with these two teams, it has the lowest total, but we saw, a couple weeks ago, it combined for over 50 points. I think it was 52 in their first matchup. So I like this game a lot. And there are also some of the highest ceiling plays on the slate in this game, specifically the 2 Steelers wide receivers, Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool.
Yeah, I definitely like the idea of being overweight on the field in terms of this game. Like you mentioned, it's one of the best games to stack to get leverage on. So, I mean, God, Deontay Johnson at 6,200, smash play. Chase Claypool at 6,100, smash play. Not going to include Juju. This man hurt his ankle by stepping on a flag. You're just soft at that point. Even Deontay Johnson wouldn't get hurt doing that. Okay, well, maybe he would, but who knows with him. But Juju at 5,900, that's a solid price tag if he plays. And these 3 Pittsburgh wide receivers are 3 of the highest ceiling plays on the slate. And I'm definitely going to be playing all 3 of these guys. And I'm going to have a lot of lineups where I play at least 2 of these guys, preferably Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool. And just real quick, just discussing prices. For me, I think I'd rather play Deontay Johnson at 6,200 rather than James Conner at 6,200. I know they're different positions, but the field could be on James Conner this week, going up against a Ravens defense that could be without Brandon Williams and Calais Campbell again, which would obviously make the matchup pretty good for James Conner, but this man just looks absolutely slow out there. He gets taken off the field in the high valuable touch situations at the goal line, in the 5-yard line, in the 10-yard line. So I think I'd be more inclined just to go with the wide receiver over the running back at the same price.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you there. I mean, there's a realistic opportunity that maybe one running back tops 20 points on this entire slate, if that. I mean, we could realistically see the entire field fall short of that mark, and I think that one of the keys is to play 4 wide receiver lineups this week. No question about it. And to the point of stacking Deontay and Claypool, that is, I mean, I was going to talk about this, but I mean, it just fits here. I think that is my favorite double stack. Big Ben to those 2 wide receivers, Claypool and Johnson, and just fly. That's what I want to be. Big Ben is going to be my favorite stack outside of the Texans stack with Deshaun Watson. If I'm going to be playing, say 10 lineups, I think 8 of them would come between those 2 quarterbacks. That's where I want to have the bulk of my action, because once we get up to the price point of Lamar Jackson at 6,800, I mean, I would rather just get to Watson at 74. At least you're getting, a decent $800 discount to go down to Ben Roethlisberger. And I think that, regardless of what we think and how the practice will, affect the Ravens in general, a lot of people will probably not want to play Big Ben against this perceived tough Ravens defense.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that point, and I don't mind Big Ben in tournaments. It's just you have to hope that he throws for 4 touchdowns in this spot if you want to win a tournament. And at 6,600, I think I'd rather just get up to Deshaun Watson, like you said, with Lamar Jackson. I think that's how I feel with Big Ben too, but I don't mind playing Big Ben stacks this week. And touching on Lamar Jackson at 6,800, he's probably going to be lower owned than Watson, than Big Ben, I think, and maybe even a cheap quarterback like Alex Smith, due to the Ravens' positive test. They're going to be missing some key offensive players on a short week going into Pittsburgh in a tough matchup. So, I mean, I like taking a shot on Lamar in these large field tournaments at 6,800 because we know that he does still have 30-point upside in any given matchup. Hasn't really done it this year, but say he can reach the 100-yard bonus on the ground, he could be a tournament winner at 6,800. I know it'd be a tough ask for him to do that, but he did run 16 times against Pittsburgh in their first matchup for 65 yards and lost 2 fumbles, though. So I think I like the idea of playing Lamar just naked in tournaments. I wouldn't stack him with any of the Ravens wide receivers because fuck Hollywood Brown.
Yeah.
Bum ass mother. Oh my God, he's so bad.
Yeah, he's definitely a bona fide scrub, definitely not in play, and I think a lot of people will play him because of his price tag. I mean, that's an easy fade. Easy fade. And I mean, if he buries me, I mean, I might just have to retire from DFS on Thanksgiving because that's totally the spot where, we spend the last 2 podcasts bashing him and then he drops 30 on our heads and 0 of our lineups. God, I can already see it happening. But I'm pretty confident that he's just a bona fide scrub and he won't get there. I mean, Mark Andrews definitely has a lot of upside to separate from the field at 5,200, highest price tight end on the slate. But I mean, he can definitely get there. He would be my favorite stacking partner with Lamar. And I agree that I think it's viable to go there naked. I mean, he's had 11 or more carries in 4 straight games now. And, J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram are not going to play in this game, COVID. So we have Gus Edwards, the bus, a player that we had a Rutgers insider, confirm that Gus Edwards is the type of player that you can go to war with. So, I mean, that's good to hear. So Gus Edwards, I think, is a phenomenal play in this spot. Had 100 yards against the Steelers, and he's coming in at the min. at 4K flat. So Gus Edwards is strong, and Justice Hill, complete trap in my opinion. No, thank you.
Yeah, I definitely am not playing Justice Hill in any lineup. Definitely a trap. I know he's gotten some buzz in the fantasy community over the last couple days. Yeah, no shot. Gus is the guy there, and at 4K, I think he could be one of the higher owned running backs if this game plays. I definitely think he will be up there in terms of ownership. Just a clear cut value on a slate where there is not many good value plays in terms of good players, but I think Gus Edwards is a legit good running back, just obviously hasn't had the opportunity, but this is a spot where he could see 15 to 20 touches, and I mean, he had 16 touches in the first matchup against Pittsburgh and averaged 5.4 yards per carry and had 87 yards, so I don't mind playing Gus Edwards. I wouldn't obviously play him in the same lineup as Lamar, so I would play Gus Edwards in my Deshaun Watson or Big Ben lineups. But I think he's a very good play on a slate where we're not going to see players at that price tag in starting roles often.
Yeah, I also think that he's a strong fade, to be honest with you. I mean, I'd be more likely to play him in cash, and there are definitely paths. Like, I won't full fade him, but I mean, his ceiling is potentially limited. I think that the Ravens getting blown out in this spot, especially with their COVID issues and their lack of practices, is a legit threat. And Edwards is not going to be getting passing game work, right? So he's not game flow independent. So there's definitely a shot that he busts and is just a waste of space in a lot of people's lineups. So I do like the idea of targeting some higher upside guys like Swift or Duke or one of the Washington guys, obviously Zeke, and just kind of excluding him from a lot of my tournament lineups. So that's something I'm thinking about. But if you are playing cash, I think you just jam him at 4K flat, and it's easy. You're gonna get a lot of touches. He has the opportunity with Ingram and Dobbins out to potentially see the most snaps that any single running back has seen in Baltimore this offseason. Because I don't think the Ravens have much interest in Justice Hill either, to be completely honest. I think that is all I've got for that game. We can move on. If you have any tournament takes that you want to give to the people, now would be the time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think if you listen or watched throughout the whole video, I think you know where I stand in tournaments. It's all about finding those cheap wide receivers that are going to smash. We saw it last year with, I think it was Danny Amendola and Cole Beasley coming in as the smash wide receivers that were like 4,200 or under. And I think that is the case this week. You're just going to have to find one cheap guy, maybe two cheap guys that go off for 18, 20 points to set your lineups apart. And I mean, we already mentioned a couple in Kiki Kuti and Steven Sims Jr. Who was the guy in the last game?
Oh yeah, I forgot. My boy Dez Bryant. I mean, this man out-targeted Marquise Brown in his first game action in years. And I mean, come on. Hollywood Brown, clear scrub, and will probably have some ownership. Dez's natural leverage. And, he could catch 2 touchdowns inside the 10-yard line. I mean, I don't think he's going to be catching 50-yard bombs. I know he's an old man. But, I mean, come on. This is Dez Bryant. Let's put some respect on his name.
Yeah, hey man, I respect it, but I probably won't go there. Could run it back this year again with Danny Amendola if he plays at 3,700. I wouldn't be too mad about that if you played him. I think Gallup at 3,500 is interesting, but that's where I stand in tournaments. All about finding the cheap wide receiver that is going to blow up this week to win you $1 million, and then obviously you gotta just hit on every single player in a 3-game slate. So
yeah, I mean, there will be a little more margin for error in the smaller fields, but yeah, like it's not a spot where you're going to want to be taking L's. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be playing McKissick this week because I don't think his ceiling is high enough to smash these tournaments, which you're going to need to kind of hit in every position, like Joey said, unless, the whole field busts, but you don't want to play anticipating that. My tournament takes are, like Joey said, I mean, you probably could tell what they are, but for me, it's going to be, not game stacking the middle game and pretty much focusing on Watson and Big Ben stacks, maybe a little bit of Lamar Jackson in there. And I think that you're going to need at least one Steelers wide receiver to win, maybe two. That's my favorite positional group to attack is Claypool and Deontay in the mid 6Ks. I think that Will Fuller is going to be good leverage off Brandon Cooks. If you look at any projections, Brandon Cooks is, profiling as one of the best value plays on the slate. So that's going to drive his ownership up. And I think that Will Fuller at 6,400 kind of priced in between those two Steelers guys and Terry McLaurin is going to get potentially overlooked, especially considering the fact that he hasn't had one of those slate breaking performances yet this year, nothing insane. And we know that's within his range. I mean, he could destroy the slate. So Will Fuller's leverage off of Brandon Cooks is the other take I have. And like I said, finally, 4 wide receivers is the lineup construction that we want to attack in tournaments this week.
Yeah. And I mean, just from a tournament perspective in 2020, 4 wide receivers has been the most winning strategy in terms of the Millie Maker. 7 Millie Maker winners have used 4 wide receivers, 3 have used 3 running backs, and 1 has used double tight end. So you want to target the 4 wide receiver lineup. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And I think we can end this podcast off with our favorite tournament players. Who is going to win somebody $1 million? I will start. I have 2. So it's not you need both of them. I think it's going to be one of these 2 players, and I think one of those guys is Kiki Kuti, and I think the other is Jordan Akins. I think you're going to need one of those guys in your Millie Maker lineups to win $1 million this week, so I will be playing them heavy.
And I think that the guy that I will put my stamp behind is Chase Claypool. Look, I love this guy. I think that Deontay is great, and Deontay might see more targets, but Chase Claypool is an official grown-ass man. Babytron. He's the new Babytron. I know that used to be Kenny G, but I mean, Chase Claypool is literally looking like, rookie season Megatron out there. So give me some Chase Claypool action as the preferred Pittsburgh wide receiver. I think that he will be in the tournament winning lineups this week.
All right, you heard it here first. Play those 3 guys and you're going to win $1 million.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to be it for us on this episode of the DFS Dose podcast. If you watched the YouTube video, we appreciate it. If you're listening on audio, make sure you sub to the YouTube channel. And thank you for listening as well. Like Joey said at the top of the show, we're available on every podcast platform: Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Podcast Addict, as well as the YouTube channel, which you are likely watching this video on. You can follow us on Twitter at the DFS Dose on the screen, and our personal Twitters as well. I'm at Ben Hauver, BenHauver. Joey, tell them where they can find you.
You can find me on Twitter at Joey Carrion DFS.
All right, guys, let's have a phenomenal Thanksgiving slate. Happy holidays, and we will talk to you on Friday.